Hi there, I'm Alyson back here with my colleagues. Today we have Tim Barber, Geoff Turner, and Cameron Holmstrom for another edition of What You Need to Know, a Canadian podcast by Blue Sky Strategy Group. First of all, happy Earth Day to everyone. I cannot think of a better day than today to discuss the green and natural resources elements that are in the budget. And Tim, you've got behind you television talking about the climate conference that's going on right now between the countries. So it's been a big one for green technology, green talk, and natural resources for policy wonks when you talk about policy. Can I get your thoughts on the green and natural resources policies that were announced in the budget on Monday? Let's start with you, Geoff.
Sure, and I think your folks yesterday talked about how the budget kind of is in 3 acts, and the first act is that pandemic response. It's the biggest one. It's more than half of the dollars that we see in those eye-popping figures, wage subsidy and other programs for workers and individuals. The second act there, of course, is the immediate stimulus coming out of that. That does have some impact on clients or others in the spaces that we're talking about today, but that would include hiring subsidies, tax incentives, training money, technological adaptations, incentive, et cetera. And the third piece, though, of course, is that future-looking transformational economy policy that the Trudeau government's been really talking about and trying to find the opportunity to give the big slam on the gas pedal to. And lo and behold, that is kind of the other main aspect, and that's how they are positioning us to move into, I'd say, probably 2023 and beyond. I mean, once you get past that initial recovery, they're looking at those long-term assets like generation, clean tech, really switching over high intensity, energy intense operations to cleaner energy sources and other things. And so the programs you see in there are quite broad. Mostly, though, I would say a lot of the focus is on, as I said, those high industrial emitters. And so we have a number of innovation programs, adaptation programs, and tax incentives. Lots of focus on those really big industrial emitters to find a way in the next basically 10 years to switch from energy sources that emit carbon to energy sources that by and large don't. But then including as well sequestration and other things, which is a whole area we'll get into, I'm sure, shortly.
Yeah, you're right there. And I mean, even Tim, you're talking about what's going on between the political leaders today. In the budget, Canada, was said that they're on track to reduce emissions by 36% by 2030 through all of their announcements. But then we have Trudeau saying now today that they're going to slash emissions by 40 to 45%. Yeah. Tim, your thoughts on all of this and how it plays into what was announced in the budget?
Look, I mean, to Geoff's point, and this is not original thought, but the number one focus of the budget was on, dealing with COVID relief. And I do think in the middle of kind of planning for this budget, this kind of third wave has come along and really hit us a lot harder. It's led to an extension of COVID measures, which, by the way, are hugely expensive. So I think a lot of the support that would have been there for other sectors, if not kind of put off further, it certainly was not in the budget. On environment or climate and natural resources, and I'm going to focus more on climate than on natural resources, we can talk about that later, is clearly, if there's an area that the Trudeau government has managed to focus on in addition to COVID, it's been climate. And I think that obviously the number one, the dominant theme beyond COVID relief measures in the budget has been the other thing that we are going to do is on climate. And it's huge. I mean, there's no question that just a massive amount of investment. They feel they can shape the market. I'm intrigued by what you just said, Alyson, around 36, and all of a sudden we're up to 45. These are incredibly aspirational. Who's going to remember what was promised 9 years from now?
We all will. Come on.
True, but look, I mean, those are big numbers. And by the way, the latest numbers would show that we have got absolutely nowhere in the last 3 years, and I'm sure Cam will remind us of that. So, I'm optimistic. I just one other caution. This is not necessarily a natural resource friendly government, in my opinion. Resource development. Let's call it agriculture and natural resources. 17 to 20% of our GDP. In some provinces and territories, it's more like 80% of your GDP. Before we start fooling around with that, you better have a good sense of what the transition looks like, and you better give people a long time or a certain amount of time to adjust. And that's my number one concern.
For sure. Cam, you're going to remember things and keep us on track?
I still remember the name of Stéphane Dion's dog, Kyoto. So yes, these things do stick in the mind. I would point out, though, and it kind of builds on what Tim is saying, is that it's true that transformation, when it takes place, does involve a lot of planning. And there's been a lot of people pushing, myself included, for that planning to have happened long ago. And if this moment has helped focus the mind a bit on that, I'll be glad to see it. But I agree with Tim. It's not something we can take lightly. I come from one of those resource regions. And while there are risks in this, there are also opportunities. And I think that's when I look at this budget I see. I noted that the Mining Association of Canada was very positive on some of the government's pushes on rare earth minerals and minerals needed for the new green economy. And I think that's the one thing that we need to consider here. Yes, there are certain industries which we need to help transition. There are certain industries that we need to help reduce emissions. But there are others that are also a part of the solutions to actually being able to get to that green future. And for all that's been there, we have not put as much into it now. And I think that's where the government has seen some opportunity. I even look in my own neck of the woods. There's a lithium project going in near my hometown, about 50 kilometers outside of town, that's going to create mining jobs in that area. It's going to create milling jobs in Thunder Bay. Like, these are the kind of things that are out there now that are possibility that the government has decided we're going to focus on. And let's face it, the geopolitical part of this has changed well because of our heavy reliance on countries like China and parts of Africa for these rare earth minerals, for everything from cell phones to for EV batteries and everything else. The other thing I also note as well, and this to me is just very interesting, is that when it comes to this budget and just the amounts that have been put into it, because Tim's right, relative to everything else, there's not that much there, but it's such a big budget that you actually have a lot of capacity. And you think about when any major project or major system has been built in this country, it's always taken federal government involvement, whether it be the railways, whether it be microwave towers for television and telephone, whether it be highways. We've always had to have that involvement. So when it comes to this transition to electric vehicles, when it comes to charging stations or electrified transit or things like that, it is going to take federal government involvement. And it's nice to see that kind of recognition in this case. For me,
speaking of recognition, though, I just jump in. I can tie together what you both have just talked about in the natural resources context. So perhaps and we don't have any Tories on the line right now, with apologies to them, if this was a conservative budget, there would have been a whole chapter on the energy sector because it's their issue, right? And whether that's advisable politically or not, we can discuss. But they probably would have had a whole lot of mentions of traditional primary industries because that's, again, where they like to live in their political speech. For the Liberals, I think what you see is the code, and so I don't disagree at all with Tim that it's not naturally, like, endemically a natural resources friendly government. Most of its its MPs and other folks come from urban suburban areas and communities that don't necessarily have a lot of resources in them and different priorities sometimes in those areas. But what I'm getting at is what you do see in this budget. Number one, there's a capstone statement around the new sustainable Canadian economy will rely on the foundation of the industries that built this country. And in fact, of about probably 8 or 9 sectors listed that included aerospace and other things, the first 2 were energy and mining. So the government right there says, this is a part of our future economy. It has to be a part of our future economy because we rely so much on it. Energy and mining are the first among those many equals. I think that's a signal in and of itself, even if it's not a whole chapter. And then the kind of the second piece of that is in other signals that they want the sector to pay attention to. Woven throughout that document, mostly in clean energy spaces, but not exclusively, mentions of Indigenous joint Indigenous projects or Indigenous-led projects or projects that feature Indigenous communities as an active participant were highly featured throughout that document. big signal. If you're not doing that, you better have a reason why, or else, we're not really going to be interested if you're coming to us.
Yeah.
Other signals, obviously the technological evolution and adapting the technologies. I'll give you a very micro one. Back in the agendas, they're back in the annexes. They updated the accelerated capital.
The annexes?
The annexes, and so well, it's not news to any of our folks listening from natural resources, but they updated the accelerated capital depreciation regime. And what did they do? They took out anything that emits carbon. So if you want natural gas cogen, that was great 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, it is no longer good. And it just signals to this government that what they will see as half measures are not good enough. They need to be measures that get you the full distance to a complete conversion to something that is less intensive and that at least can be offset maybe by things like CCUS for the remainder. So I'll stop there, but I think just you see those signals, even if it isn't an in-your-face, we love hard hats chapter.
So is this all good for all of what you guys have talked about? Really, what's going to be the effect on the country and our economy because of all these different policies that have been introduced? And will we actually see these policies come to fruition, Tim?
Well,
Cam.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I was going to say the if part's always the $64,000 question, and I always leave that out there because I just take the approach I believe it when I see it. But I think the greater impact on the overall economy, and you look, and I'm going to bring this back to the energy sector because this to me is just one of the good. Tim raised the right point about this transition that's going to take place, and how is it that we keep the economy going and keep those who are working in that economy going and earning those good wages. I think of friends and family of mine who used to work in the paper mills when they shut down, who went out west to go work in the oil sector with a lot of translatable skills that went with it. And I still remember about 5 years ago meeting on the Hill with union reps from Unifor, from their mill in Kapuskasing, talking about how they had a lost generation of workers because when they had to shut down, they lost all these workers that went out west and never came back, or those that were going back and forth. And that's always been a big piece of the energy economy, has been the translation of the moving of workers, people living in Nova Scotia, working in Alberta, that kind of thing. To my mind,
a lot coming out of Kenny's mouth, that's for sure.
It's true, but this has been, it has sustained a lot of regions. Those jobs in Alberta have sustained a lot of regions. I think what you're seeing with a lot of these potential new green energy jobs in the natural resource sector is that it allows a lot of these people to take those skills and go back home, to earn that good wage and go back home, and also it creates opportunities in Alberta itself. So I think it's interesting that to me, one of the big pieces is going to be, instead of a lot of this activity being necessarily located in 1 or 2 parts of the country, it has the potential for everyone to have their piece across the country and take those skills and actually have their own piece of the pie, which I think is going to be good for a lot of rural regions, especially when I think of areas like Atlantic Canada, in Northern Ontario, parts of British Columbia, where you've seen this outward migration and the economic effects of that. I think that's going to that's not going to totally reverse, but also it's creating opportunities for those people to come back home, to have that lifestyle, and to boost their own economy. So I think the economic impact potential gets a little more spread out across the country, because I think that's the other thing too. The government hasn't just gone in on 1 or 2 technologies. They're going in across the board. It's a kitchen sink approach to green technology. It's going to be hydrogen, it's going to be tidal power, it's going to be solar, it's going to be wind, it's going to be whatever's going to work for you, we're going to do it if it's not emitting. And I think that's the key thing, is that I think it really levels the playing field for a lot of the provinces and gives everyone a piece, an opportunity to have their own piece of the pie and have their own little boom.
You agree, Tim?
I don't want to jump ahead of Tim, but I do want to talk also about a bridge. But I think if you're looking, inherent in your question, Alyson, is also, can natural resources boosters and liberal government folks ever see eye to eye on some really fundamental things? And we see a lot of challenges in that relationship. We see successes in that relationship. But here's the bridge I think that I see available to everybody. And usually, again, I'm not to bring partisanship back into this again, but I'm also sometimes I'm sympathetic very much to the sort of the Canadian resources as having just an excellent and unassailable position as ethically developed in our modern context, in our modern context going forward. They have unparalleled Indigenous engagement and respect built in, and rigorous environmental reviews that go through, obviously, sometimes a decade to get to the other end. All of these things. Yeah, and let me just be clear, I've actually got like exactly zero time for Ezra Levant. I don't want to bring him into this, but the whole idea of
Please.
Canada's resources are actually head and shoulders above many of our direct competitors in the world. And what value do you attach to that? And so what I see the bridge here, just to come back to why I brought this up, is a federal government really extending not just an olive leaf, but a ATM machine to say, we want to help you get even better in that, or not even we want to help you. We're going to expect you to get there, and we're going to help you to get there. But on the other side, I think what also can be validated is that as a result of all of this, we can even further promote ourselves, and maybe and maybe again, being sympathetic to some more conservative arguments, think about our impact in the broader global economy, as well as thinking about our own backyard, which of course we have to take good care of and be leaders on in the world, or at least some people would suggest we should be. But I think we can achieve both of those things, and to me, that's a bridge that I think you can bring those two presently fairly far apart groups together on.
Tim, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I'm in violent agreement with everything that's been said. So look, to close it off, are we on a time?
Yep.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Look, I mean, my projection is first there'll be an election in 2021. I think it's more likely in the fall now than in the spring, although spring is still possible. Second, at some point, in the not too distant future, we are going to have to turn attention to something which Canadians are all very enthusiastic about, which is taxes and actually revenue and balancing the books. But I do think over the short run, and Tiff Macklin said this yesterday from the Bank of Canada, we're going to go through a economic boom. The pump is so primed right now and so jacked and over caffeinated, I think for the next 2 to 3 years. And I just don't know where that leads. I know where it leads in terms of massive economic expansion and everyone's working. But it's, just hang on to your hats. And as for our clients and people that are interested in, read up on what's in the budget. There's massive amounts of program money available. I do think you're going to need some time for the system writ large to absorb all of which has been put on their table. But there's a massive amount of opportunity to Geoff's point and to Cam's that, read the signals, if you don't have an Indigenous partner in a whether it's a clean tech program or a natural resource project, you're missing the narrative, and I think there's just massive opportunities there for us and by the way, the real exciting part for me is, this is true Indigenous economic reconciliation. That's the opportunity. And that's what excites me over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, that's I like that spot to end on for sure. Tim, Geoff, Cam, another great discussion. Thank you. Tomorrow we're going to talk about innovation, so that should be another great discussion. And thank you to the viewers for tuning into What You Need to Know, a Canadian Polycast. Until next time, stay happy and stay safe. Bye, guys.
See ya.
Take care.
Bye.
Blue Sky Strategy Group is one of Canada's leading public affairs firms. For government relations, lobbying, and strategic communications advice across Canada, visit us at blueskystrategygroup.com. Blue Sky Strategy Group is a proud member of the Global Communications Alliance.